Welcome to Jian Batra's 15-minute FPL podcast, and this is the Game Week 17 preview. We've had half of the festive period thus far. We've had injuries, suspensions, big rank swings, the lot, and we're going to have the lot again. So, as it's becoming increasingly difficult, I am back to help you navigate this wonderful, wonderful run that we have. So, without further ado, let's get into it. I'm going to start by giving you a present because I'm so nice. This is a big, big present. It's 30 days free for a Fantasy Football Hub membership and 30% off. You can't really put your money to better use than improving your FPL rank, and we do that by providing you with an AI team and a set of tools that is quite simply magnificent. The AI team is flying. We'll give you a price prediction tool that is 99% accurate. So, like I said, what better way to spend your money? And if you do want to join, then look, you have 30 days free. What an opportunity. I'm going to start with the biggest topic of the week, and that is the big Norwegian, who none of us know if he's fit or not. It's very difficult to predict as to how his fitness is going to turn out and will he be there for Game Week 17. So I'm going to kind of lay out a few roadmaps and then you can apply whichever is most applicable to your team. Let's just say we don't get any information, right? Which is probably the likeliest outcome. Let's say we don't get any information. Should you sell it? Now, I think you have to really assess what we're given, even if we're given crumbs, and kind of make a decision as to whether you think he's going to play or not. I can't make that decision for you, but say we get no information, I'm going to assume that he's out. And then I think it becomes a far more plausible sell for you to go for one of the replacements, which we're going to touch on to. Simply because of that blank Game Week 18, you can probably fade him in 19, and then it's a very easy route to get him back in 20 when you just sell Salah maybe a week early. And also it offsets the pressure of having another player leaving for AFCON or the Asia Cup in Game Week 21. So I think in that case, it works really well. So if we get no news, I'd sell him. Naturally, if he's fit, you have to keep him. If we get news that like it's 50-50, which is what I really wanted to touch on, then I wouldn't sell him because I think the utility you get out of saving those 2 free transfers over the long run, because you have to obviously bring him in and sell him, is going to be more worthwhile down the line. And even if you don't get those immediate gains, you'll be thankful that you kept him on your bench. Playing someone like Cameron Archer this week is absolutely fine. Chelsea look diabolical at the back. Sheffield United honestly look far better than people are giving them credit for, especially going forward. I like the triangle of James McAtee, Osula, and Archer, right? I think Archer has looked pretty sharp in the last 2 games. He should have done better in a few instances. The fact that he's getting into these positions in the first place is very promising. Like I said, Chelsea look very poor at the moment. So even if he were to be your replacement, I think that's fine. Especially when a lot of you guys, and including myself, will have fires elsewhere and the transfers can be used elsewhere. I don't know, to remove a Mitchell or a Trippier, which we're going to come on to. It makes far more sense. So I think unless we get absolute clarity that he's going to start, I think he's a sell. Now, onto his replacements. There's a lot of options, as you can see, but for me, one stands out, and it's the man in the middle. It's Dominic Solanke. The fixtures are there, the form's there, the price is there, the minutes is there, the penalties is there. I don't really think you can ask for much more, honestly. And not only that, is he a brilliant asset in isolation, but he facilitates so much elsewhere, right? Say you save like 1 million on him over Darwin Núñez, who I think is a good punt for this week, which we're going to go on to. I think you can use that maybe to upgrade your defense, not just in one spot, but in 2 spots. Maybe you go from a 4.5 to a 5, and you do that twice, or a 4 to a 4.5 and a 4.5 to a 5. And that could, over the long run, get you so many points. And I think Dominic Solanke can go toe-to-toe with any of these guys on screen and honestly beat them. Bournemouth have, I think, executed the idea of their manager far better as opposed to making significant changes in recent times. I think one of my biggest things regarding their issues was the spaces between their lines, and they seem to really fix that. Naturally, as a result of that, ball circulation improves both in tempo and in accuracy, and furthermore, as a result, the chances that Solanke is going to get are of a different style. They're not so direct, resultant of direct football. They're not resultant of purely transition-based football, but rather the build-ups of a better nature, and thus the chances he gets are probably more solid, I would describe, and chances that easier for him to finish, as opposed to him having to make a bursting run through the channels and having a second just to finish it. That's more so what you're going to get from the old Bournemouth. So I really like that, and I think it's not just like a blip, but Bournemouth are, for now, a much better side with good players. With regards to the other options, I like Isak and Alvarez, even though they're on the fringes and they would be classified as differentials. I think with Wilson starting midweek, with Gordon potentially nursing a hamstring issue of sorts, And obviously, this is on the assumption that Haaland is out, so Alvarez will play 9. I quite like it. Obviously, in game week 18, you will have to sort Alvarez out. You'll have to sell him again. But I think he's quite a good punt for this week. Palace haven't looked great on the road as of late. So yeah, I like both of these options. Watkins is your set and forget for me. The fixtures are so good for the next 10 to 12 weeks that if you get him, you can kind of just leave him there. He's similar to Solanke in a lot of ways, to be honest. So for me, it goes Solanke, then Watkins. Nunes is a bit of an enigma. You never really know what you're going to get with him. I really fancy him for this week. I think it's a nice matchup, especially with Maguire out. I'm not sure the United centre-back is going to be able to deal with his personal level of physicality. I think that's something that's kind of underrated with this game. Just because he's a bit erratic, it kind of gets taken away. But incredible speed and good strength to go alongside with it, even though the muscles aren't too big. A lot of footballers like him, Livramento, have the body type, which is very suitable for football. And I think he's definitely going to, sell in that game, or at least do well. So if I could choose one, it would be Solanke. And Watkins, if you can stretch him, would be my set and forget, simply because, look, I've talked about the fixtures already, but you don't have to do anything down the line, which I think is a big deal. The route to him is obviously a bit more difficult and sacrifices will have to be made, but I think it's worth it. And Nunes, for me, the punt this week, if you don't have him, I think it's fine. I know a lot of people are talking about selling him, and I think he's like the 5th, 6th most sold player. But if anything, I would be looking to bring him in. Moving on, we've got to discuss captaincy. We'll start with the punts first, Sterling and Nunes. I think both are decent options. I would probably stray away from Sterling. I've just seen a bit of talk about him, hence I thought I'd include him. With Sheffield United, I think let's say their front 5, right, of their 2 centre mids, their attacking midfielder, and their 2 strikers, probably are the best set of players in their team, alongside the goalkeeper. I think their backline is a little bit weaker than the rest of the team, just in general. But if Chelsea struggle with a break down a low block again, which I can see, then I can see Sterling not doing so well. And that's why I've included on him, not to maybe promote the pick, but to kind of shut down the pun that a lot of people seem to be taking on Twitter. Maybe not a lot of people, but there's certainly some talk about it. I think given Chelsea's struggles against low blocks continuously, there's no real reason for you to kind of think, oh, they're going to change it, especially when Sheffield United are getting better and Chelsea look on a downward trajectory at the moment. So I would probably avoid him. Nunes I like. I already talked about it. I think it's a good stylistic fit for him. With him, I think the goals are always around the corner. I know we say that a lot, but he seems to thrive in this type of fixture. Done well against Man United in the past. Something to certainly take into account. Son, Salah, and Saka are probably the 3 premier options. Saka not talked about as much, but I do really like the game for him. A nice rest midweek, albeit he did travel. And I think Brighton really don't look too good at the moment. I don't think it's something that's really been talked about. The FPL assets from their club have kind of been disregarded as a result of De Zerbi's rotation and Estepinion's unavailability. But I don't think they've looked great at the moment, slightly leaky. And I think Saka could really have a good day. He's good at home, traditionally, in comparison to away. You've got penalties as well. A good stylistic fit. I think they'll offer him the space that he hasn't had too much in other games where he's been doubled up on. Even if he gets doubled up on transition, at least he'll have time. Space. So I actually really like the punt to go for Saka here. And if you didn't want to go for Salah, he would be my preference over Son. Now, looking at Son, I completely understand why people are going to go there. The fixtures on paper good. Forest haven't been in the best of form, although they were far better at Wolves. I just don't think the system matchup is particularly suitable for him. If they don't get an early goal, I can see it kind of taking a West Ham type of trajectory in terms of how the game goes. I still expect Spurs to get the job done and win, unlike they did at West Ham. However, I think it could be a bit more of a struggle. And whilst he is in great form, I think when you have a premier option like Salah, there is no need to really take that stylistic risk, especially when you consider Salah is the best big game player out of the current crop. He's looked really good in recent weeks in comparison to like the weeks before. I know he was hauling against the likes of Everton, let's say, or Brighton, but he wasn't having as big of an impact on the game. But against Fulham, for example, which is the last home game, and what I'm kind of really resting on, he looked really sharp, and the penetration of the half spaces was there. He didn't need to go so wide. And with Elliott in good form, I can imagine he comes on earlier. And Elliott is always good for Salah because he facilitates the combinations really well. Elliott will happily drift into those wider areas because he's very competent there, and he's also very, very selfless. That's something I think Elliott doesn't get enough credit for. United have got a lot of injuries, and whilst I don't think it's going to be the mauling that people expect, like the 7-0, I can certainly foresee a 3-0, but with Salah having a large involvement. And it's just the fact that the shackles are kind of off with him now. He's more willing to or allowed to drift into the more central spaces, which I really like. Now, you're probably thinking, why is this pretty picture here? And it's because it's representative of a landscape, of course. And I want to talk about the FPL landscape, but rather than showing you some pixels, which you see all the time, I thought I would show you a lovely picture. We've had 4 weeks of the festive period, and you've already seen repeatedly how quickly things change. Injuries, suspensions, freak results, teams hitting form. And it's why I said in my first podcast of this period that I think you need to approach this period slightly differently. And I think I've seen a lot of managers make that mistake, whereby they played a bit too risky and a bit too aggressive. And I would just say stick to the formula. Assets who have good fixtures, 90 minutes and penalties. You don't really need much more than that. Even the fixtures you can kind of offset, but 90 minutes is the main thing. 90 minutes and a talismanic nature, the main two things. I think you'll get so much out of that in comparison to other people who are consistently chopping, changing, and always reacting to what's going on. Whereas if you've picked assets who are stable, you at least give yourself the opportunity to maybe create a really nice move. For example, like selling 2 assets for a hit because you're in such a good position, and buying 2 really high upside assets for the week. But you can't do that when you're constantly reacting. So I would say just go back to basics for this period, right? Just pick good expected minutes players, and you will be rewarded. I've done that thus far in this period, and I've definitely been rewarded, especially last week. Moving on to the defense, obviously Pedro Porro is a man who's in high demand, and very justifiably so. He's looked really good, and I think he's getting more comfortable with his position, like coming into the half spaces, how far he's got to progress up the pitch, what he's got to do with that role, overlapping, underlapping, shots from range, crosses from range, progressive passes, and I think he's becoming really comfortable with that role, and he's clearly got the skill set to do that. So with the way Postecoglou likes to use his fullbacks, almost like 8s, especially Udogie's practically a 9 at times. It's quite incredible. I think he's going to amass attacking returns for sure, because he's actually got the quality in the final third to execute those technical actions. And thus, I really like him. So if you can get him. I wouldn't double up on him and Udogie, just because I think Spurs concede too many chances and thus too many goals. But I really like him as an option. I wouldn't break your team for him, so I don't think he's that important. And I could see Forest scoring potentially. But I do think he's one of the premier assets, especially in defense to own. Now, Gabriel is here because he's representative of both him and Saliba. I would not sell your Arsenal defense, and I really like having the Arsenal defense. It goes back to the point I just made. They're both going to play every game. They've got good fixtures. They play for a manager who seeks dominance, control, pragmatism, and they play in a team with a very good defensive unit. The likes of Declan Rice in front of them makes them formidably strong. Now, realistically, when they've conceded in the recent period, it's been more so mistakes from like Raya or Zinchenko, but I imagine eventually those get omitted completely. And as such, I'm looking forward to getting some clean sheets from the Arsenal boys. I just don't think it's worth the transfer. They're worth the money as well. Like Gabriel and Saliba aren't even that expensive, especially if you pick them up earlier in the season. I think you can keep them for another 5-6 weeks at least, and you'll certainly be rewarded. And I imagine in that time, maybe one of them gets a goal as well, because both are looking quite threatening from set pieces. The Bournemouth man here, Senese, look, he scored a lot of points in the last 2 weeks, and he has 3 really good fixtures. So I think great. He does become a bit of an issue after that, though. So I wouldn't break the bank, or I wouldn't really rip up your team just so you can have him for 3 weeks. I would rather have like longer term assets like your Gabriels and Salibas, and Pedro Porros, even though they require a bit more money. I think it's a better usage of funds, and you probably have fires elsewhere. So sure, if you have a plan whereby your defense isn't too weak after another 3-4 game weeks, and yeah, sure. But I don't think it's a priority transfer, as some are making it out to be. Gusto will come back into the fold with Reece James' injury pretty soon. He looked good at right back, and he's a very competent player. So when he comes back, I think this is certainly one to monitor. So it's just the fact that you can have a 4.1 million asset in your team, and that's just something to include in your planning. I know a lot of people are selling Matty Cash and have been for numerous weeks, given that he's got dropped. But I can see him playing game week 18 and 20. I think both are good fixtures to just give him some minutes and to keep him happy, because obviously man management is a big part of the game. But also the styles you're going to get from Burnley and Sheffield United. I think both, even though they're slightly unique, I think Cash suits both of them, essentially. So I can see him playing at least one of these, and I think thus it could be a pretty good hold for you guys rather than using a transfer. And then lastly, just moving on to the likes of Trippier, Gordon, and Taylor, I brought them more as representatives, as as opposed to me talking about them directly. Injuries and suspensions, or in Trippier's case, a bit of both. With the suspensions and the players on 4 yellow cards, I honestly think if your asset has 4 yellow cards or you're looking at an asset with 4 yellow cards, you just have to stomach it and take on the risk, because the probability of them getting a yellow card in that game or the next 2 games isn't actually that high. They've accumulated 4 in maybe 16. That's 1 in every 4. So you're like at 25%, right? So I think you're fine to kind of gamble and take the risk of those assets. If you've got injured players, I would seriously try and minimize hits. Just use your bench as much as you can. I know a lot of you have benches that are depleting, but like I said, if you have the likes of Cameron Archer, just start him. It's far more worthwhile than selling someone for a hit. For example, Archer gets an assist and you need 9 points to match him. 9 points is very difficult to match. So I would say with the injuries, just try and minimize hits. And I personally, given Gordon's on this cover, I think he's going to miss this week. I think if he's got a hamstring issue, such a tight turnaround, it's a bit of a risk to take and an unnecessary one when your squad's already so thin. I guess you could play maybe Callum Wilson again, or you could play Isak on the left, or you could play Isak up top, Joel Linton on the wing, etc., etc. So that concludes it. And if you could please like and subscribe, we would really appreciate that. Make sure to follow both myself and Fantasy Football Hub on Twitter. The @ and the tags are there. And lastly, again, here's your present: 30 days free and 30% off. A fantastic use of your money. And that concludes it. So I look forward to seeing you for Game Week 18 and enjoy the game week. Goodbye.